Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Flipp The Script podcast, the youth-led podcast by FlippGen, where we, the digital rebels, discuss all things digital well-being and discover ways in which we can all build healthier relationships with technology and the digital world. I'm Paddy, a digital rebel, and I'm hosting alongside Mariam and Eden, another two digital rebels. And for those listeners who are new to FlippGen, we are a youth-led digital wellbeing movement aimed at improving the next generation's relationship with technology and fostering healthier digital habits.
Thank you, Paddy. I'm Mariam, and on today's episode, we're joined by Clare Fernyhough. Clare is a business psychologist, a behaviour change expert, and with the driving force between two really impactful campaigns focused on children's relationships with technology, namely smartphone-free childhood and more recently Generation Focus. Claire's also a former broadcast journalist and applies her expertise in behaviour change to advocate for a cultural shift in how children interact with digital devices.
As a co-founder of Generation Focus, she leads the Free to Focus campaign, encouraging schools to implement genuinely smartphone-free policies. This initiative aims to foster an environment where children can engage in learning and social interaction without constant digital distractions. Her work, which began as a viral WhatsApp conversation in 2024, seeks to empower parents and influence policy driven by the belief that childhood is too short to be spent on a smartphone. So welcome, Claire. It's really exciting to have you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Thank you, Eden. Yeah, as kind of Eden and Mariam touched on, you've had quite a varied career working in broadcast journalism at places like ITN and Channel 4, and then also business psychology before co-founding Smartphone Free Childhood in 2024. Was there a specific moment that led you to focus all your work on the digital world and protecting childhood?
Yeah, as you said, I'm a psychologist, so I think a lot about how the world we live in impacts us and how we interact in the world. And I think that's what got me started thinking about it. But really, it was my children. I'm a mother of two. I've got a 9 and 11-year-old. And at the time when we started our first WhatsApp group for Smartphone Free Childhood, my daughter was 9. And I was looking ahead to secondary school, and I was thinking, I can see what's going to happen here. She's going to get a smartphone. Because that's what everyone does. And I think the psychologist in me just realized this is not necessarily going to be great for her. I can see how addictive these things are. I'm addicted to my phone. I don't want to give my 11-year-old something that she's going to find really, really hard to put down. So it was a very, very personal thing, really. And I think also I looked around and thought, people aren't talking about this enough. This is a really weird situation that we have walked into. You know, we've put this big thing on the younger generation, but we're not really talking about it. And so, you know, just it started with a conversation with my friend Daisy, and it just went from there. But it really just came from my personal situation. You know, kind of selfishly, I was thinking, I want to fix this thing before my daughter gets to secondary school. And I don't think we've gone that far yet. But yeah, obviously it has an impact, and it's been amazing seeing parents come together across the whole country and beyond just to say, actually, you know what, this isn't right.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the amount of people you speak to who are involved in this kind of work, who have that kind of shared experience of lived experience with their own children or that on themselves, but also that professional experience.
Thank you, Paddy. So on the topic of having social medias and sort of trying to have that outreach as well, looking back on the original Instagram post and the WhatsApp chat that helped spark, I think, a really strong community. You've got, I reckon, about 350,000. See, it's a lot of people, a lot of parents. And I wanted to ask, what surprised you most about how quickly the movement grew, and what did it reveal about parents' fears around smartphones and social media?
Yeah, it was really, really surprising. And as you say, you know, there was that Instagram post, which, to be fair, you know, Daisy and I both wrote one. I don't have many followers on Instagram. I'm rubbish on Instagram. But something about Daisy's post just went absolutely crazy. People started sharing it. And it was the most extraordinary experience, just suddenly looking down at our phones and being like, wow, like hundreds of people are joining every few hours. It was pretty, overwhelming, slightly terrifying. I didn't sleep for about a week because it just was like, what on earth is going on here? This was so strange. It was so surprising. But I think what it showed was just that, yeah, this is something that every single parent was worrying about. And we all had this deep sense of the fact that there's something not quite right here, but we hadn't managed to quite put it into words. And, that Instagram post, it crystallized it. And suddenly everyone stood up and said, no, this isn't right. So I think it was a moment in time. And I think there were a few other things that happened at the same time. Esther Jai launched her campaign. If you know about her horrific story with her daughter Brianna, she launched her campaign at the same time. And I think also Jonathan Haidt's book came out a few weeks later, and he is a very, very, very powerful voice on all of this. And yeah, I think it was just that kind of aha moment for everybody to go, yeah, we are all thinking the same thing. And the irony, of course, is that that was able to happen via WhatsApp, which is a meta platform, as we know. The irony of that is not lost on us, but it did mean that it could happen very quickly and lots of people could connect to each other. And there was an incredible moment early on where we had a couple of big national groups, and we basically said to them one evening, we said, can you all just create communities in your counties, wherever you are? And within half an hour, we could see Sussex, Hampshire, Cornwall, all of, Scotland, Wales, all of these communities popping up. And so, that is the power of WhatsApp. And yeah, it was just an amazing moment to see.
Yeah, I agree. The fact that you just touched on how ironic it is, especially because it's, you're advocating against technology and social media, but on social media, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, but it does bring both concerns, or rather bring people to be concerned enough to come together. So it does have a bit of a knockback effect. I definitely agree there. I'll pass this on to Eden now.
So as a psychologist and behaviour change specialist, you talk about shifting norms rather than telling people to try harder. When you think about families and schools, what kind of norms around children and phones are you most interested in changing, apart from obviously getting them out of schools?
So, yeah, I think it's the assumptions that we all sleepwalk into, which I'm so interested about. And so, yeah, I just think that the fact that children are now, 24% of 5 to 7-year-olds have got their own smartphone, that's something we urgently need to change, because we have enough evidence now that that is not benefiting them, and it's taking them away from all the other stuff that they can be doing that's going to help them benefit more. The other norm that I'm really interested in, and actually I'd be really interested in your views as well, coming from the childhood I had where there were no phones. I didn't get a phone. I got a brick phone when I was 16. I find the constant contact thing quite interesting, and particularly parents and children being in constant contact. And the head teachers that we talk to, it's a real nightmare. So they're trying to run a school, and then they have parents texting them going, well, my child's being bullied in geography. He's really upset. What are you going to do about it? And whilst, of course, we as parents want our children to be happy, I really believe there's a bit of an umbilical cord that's happening now between parents and children, where children are not being allowed just to get on with stuff and build resilience and, solve their own problems, have an argument at school, feel a bit upset about it, but move on. And I think that the fact that there's now that constant texting, it means that actually parents are able to kind of jump in and rescue too much. As my work as a psychologist, I talk a lot about rescuing, how rescuing is not healthy, because rescuing creates victims. So if you constantly rescue someone, that person ultimately loses their power, loses their agency, and can become a victim of the situation. I think that is happening through good intention from parents. And I also think parents are putting their anxiety onto kids. So if we think about the rise in tracking, and I'd be really interested in all of your views on this, the idea now that parents are wanting to track their child's every single move. I believe that's saying to children, the world's not safe unless we know where you are all the time. And that is not true. The world is safer than it has ever been. The stats show that. And actually, that whole stranger danger, don't take sweets from children, don't get into a car with children, with strangers. Most of those predators are now online. So, the world is much, much safer than it was before. But yet there's this growing norm of wanting to trap children everywhere. And I really, really think we need to pause on that and think, is this actually what we're doing? Because we're stopping them building resilience. And I think a lot of it does come from the tech companies. So if you look at the quite insidious messaging, for example, these trainers now, where you can put a tracker in the trainers and it says things like, you've got peace of mind, comfort that your child is safe. So what it's saying to parents is, if your child doesn't have these trainers, they might not be safe. And actually, if we think about what that's saying, and I think it's really concerning. And I think we need to take a step back and think, is that what we want childhood to look like? If I think about the best times in my childhood, they were when I was with mates, doing something probably on my own, feeling like I had a bit of freedom. And I would say that most of the parents who are now tracking, when they think back to their childhoods, that's the same for them too. So I think we need to stop putting our own anxiety onto kids, really. And I think that's a norm that I would really love to challenge.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that I didn't know about the trainers, like that kind of blows my mind in a way, like how easy access it is to kind of track people now. And I think, parents are really reliant on technology to have that constant communication. I'm going to pass to Paddy for the next section.
Yeah, kind of following on from that around, parents in schools and that kind of communication. And you've used the phrase like sleepwalk a few times, and I think that's really relevant for education. And obviously one of the things that you're focusing on now is smartphone-free schools. And I think I left school a couple of years ago, but I definitely felt in the last few years that education had moved so far online with bus passes, schedules, like sports and notifications. What do you see? How can you see a genuinely smartphone-free school? And how does that look like for students when so much of their day at the moment revolves around technology?
Yeah, and I think we need to, again, this is a point in time where we need to pause and look at all of this and say, hang on, is this what we want? Because phones are becoming embedded into schools unnecessarily. And so is EdTech as well, to be honest. I'm not saying no screens in classrooms, absolutely no way. We are not anti-tech in any way, but this is about being conscious. And, as you say, bus tickets is a really good example. That isn't necessary. You can have a QR code, you can do it without a phone. But if things get evolved so that actually it just becomes completely normalized and you have to have a smartphone to get on a bus to get to school, then children who would like to not have a smartphone, and we know that there are a lot who would actually rather say, you know what, I don't want all of that burden, they're trapped. And they actually have to. And in the same way, children being asked to use their phones in lessons, if they're being bullied on WhatsApp and they'd like to not have their phone because they know they can concentrate better, they can't do that now. I think that's a real problem. But, we work with head teachers across the country. We work with some incredibly inspiring leaders, and they've shown how it's possible. Increasingly, we're seeing schools with, you're only allowed to bring a brick phone. I know that's not what your generation doesn't like that term. We'll call it a simple phone. You're only allowed to bring a simple phone to school. And, yes, there may be some technology used in the classroom, but it's not relied upon. Paper timetables are absolutely fine. There's lots of ways around this. And there's always a way around all of these things. I think it just takes being conscious, being brave, and just remembering 10 years ago, we didn't have any of these things, and mental health was better for young people. We know that IQ scores are going down globally, and they have been for quite a few years now. So these screens in the classroom are not helping us. They're not helping us learn better, and they're not helping, sort of IQ scores in any way. So I think we need to be bold and brave and just say we don't need this. Of course, some learning online is absolutely fine, but I think we need to make a distinction between addictive design and, are the children the product, or is the technology actually helping them learn? And a lot of the time, if you look at these apps, for example, I look at TT Rockstars. I don't know if you guys ever use that. My children are obsessed with it, of course, because it's designed to be addictive. It's very dopamine fueled. It's reward driven. They get their little coins. They can buy a new hairstyle or whatever it is. And that is using addictive design. In the same way, Duolingo, the language app, is using the same design as Snapchat. It's streaks. Just to tell the story, I found my 8-year-old in his bedroom. This was before I realised how bad Duolingo was. He was doing some Duolingo French homework, and he was howling because the penguin looked sad because he'd stopped playing. And he said, "Mummy, the penguin's really, really sad. I need to keep playing." And I had to explain to him about sort of algorithmic design and the fact that wasn't a penguin. That was probably someone making a lot of money in Silicon Valley. So it was a useful life lesson for him. But he shouldn't be in this situation. It's manipulative. So I think we need to make the distinction between the good technology and the stuff that's really, really manipulative. And, we do not need smartphones in schools. In fact, they are a disaster for learning. I mean, who thought it was a good idea to give children the most addictive device that has ever been invented with the whole world at their fingertips and then say, now put this off, turn this off in your bag and focus? It's not fair and it's not realistic. And the idea that we're expecting this, 84% of schools have got a no see, no hear policy where that is what it is. The phone is off in the bag. It doesn't work. And we've heard from so many teenagers that, it's, lessons are just something to be got through so they can go back to the loo to check Snapchat. And that's before we even think about the safeguarding and the things that children we know now are seeing in the school day. Amazing teenager Flossie McShay, she's spoken out about this now and said, the things that she saw in the school day. It's not right, and we do need to kind of be quite bold on that and say that enough is enough.
Yeah, I agree. And the Duolingo point really resonates with me, because a few times I've been woken up at 11:30 knowing that I need to do Duolingo to keep my streak, and I'm 20 years old, and I think that and even the notifications you send, they've started friendship streaks now. So me and my sister have a friendship streak, and if I'm not doing it, I get a notification of her character crying, which is really scary when you, so not something I'd thought about, but when you put it like that, when you've got developing minds who are going through the same thing, is really scary. So I guess my next question is around that, and you talk about smartphone free school, and you've touched on it a little bit, but does that extend to smartphone free homework as well? Because I know my sister's a teacher, and she said that, I've spoken to her, and she said that she doesn't even need to mark any of the homework anymore. It just comes up with a mark on the computer. And I think this is a kind of extension of what's going on at schools. So do you think that should be part of the smartphone free schools as well?
So a smartphone is a terrible device to do homework on. I mean, we all know what we do when we're on our smartphone. We hunch over. Any doctor will tell you that kids using smartphones is now leading to myopia, neck and back problems, because we all hunch over. And it's too small, so it's not a suitable device. And I know that schools are stretched and budgets are really tight, but if we get into a situation where children are having to do work on smartphones, it's going to have, purely physically, it's going to have a big impact on them before you even start thinking about everything else. So I'm not saying no homework on devices. I personally think we are relying on it way too much. Most schools who you see, when it gets adopted, suddenly it's sort of everything is on a screen because it's easier. That's not great. Doesn't mean that nothing should be done on a screen. I certainly don't think that. But, we need to get to a place where there is a home device that they can do some homework on if they need to. It might be a family device. I know that the cost of living crisis, people are really stretched at the moment, and and there are some devices which cost £60. They're not a huge amount to be able to do your homework on a proper laptop or, some sort of Chromebook. And if families can't afford that, there should be a subsidy for that as well. I just think we can't get into a situation where children are having to hunch over to a tiny device to do their homework. But I'm certainly not saying that nothing should be done on a screen. There are, as with all of these things, there are ways around it, and it's very easy for people to push back and say, "Oh no, it's not fair. Families can't afford it, so we need to get it to on a smartphone." I don't think that's good enough. I think that is a little bit of a cop out. So yeah, I'm saying homework can be done on some screens, but ideally not on a smartphone.
Yeah, I think that's the balance, and pragmatism is the kind of answer in my view. And a lot of the people who argue against it are kind of portray us and campaigners who want to reduce smartphone use as we just want to get rid of it all, but actually and technology use, but actually it's not the case. And as you say, it's a bit of a cop out. So passing back to Mariam now.
Thank you, Paddy. I just wanted to springboard off of that and how you're talking about how we didn't really need phones in school, and how it sort of culminates this culture in the classroom that everybody should have a phone or have something quite recent. I know for a fact that one of the first things I was picked on was because I had a brick phone. I just pulled it out and it was the first thing that everyone saw, and that stuck with me for about a week. But I do remember at the time I was really upset about it. But definitely when it comes to having that sort of classroom environment where you've got everyone on a device, so everyone being affiliated with something, just recent technology anyway, it sort of becomes a lifeline, something with social status as well. And it becomes also something that is you've got contacts, IDs on it, accounts, that kind of thing. So the fact that if it could get confiscated or lost, it becomes a really big deal for young kids, which it shouldn't be. But I will take you to sort of talk about the idea of distracted parenting and creating a validation gap that social media later fills for kids. So from your perspective, what are the most important things that parents can do differently with their own phones to protect their children's sense of worth?
I think that is an amazing question. I think you've hit the nail on the head on that one. this is the elephant in the room that none of us want to talk about. It's our own screen addiction, technoference as it's now called. Yeah, it's a massive problem. Adults are addicted to our phones. My screen time has gone up exponentially since smartphone free childhood started, and I see that dopamine loop that I'm in. I'm checking, I'm looking for that validation, I'm distracted, and it's very hard to be present. If the point of life is to be able to be present in the moment, whether you're a child or an adult. And we need to be able to be present with our children so that they feel validated. I completely agree, and children sense this. I think even if you're showing that you're present, but actually your mind's elsewhere, they know that. And then I worry that there's a ticking time bomb of children who are growing up not feeling like their parents are really focusing on them. So I think we need to be much, much better and much stricter, and we need to look at our own our own behavior. The things that work for me personally are actually just put the phone away, put it upstairs, or even better, have it switched off. Have a smartphone free Sunday where your phone is completely off. I notice that when I do that, I am so much more present with my children, and I get way less irritable about things. And it's really hard to do. And actually, part of the reason it's hard to do is not because I want to go. I don't have any social media on my phones except for WhatsApp, which is social media. But it's the norm that's evolving, which is people expect to be able to speak to me at any point. So if my phone's off for a day and someone can't get hold of me, that becomes like a drama. Like, where is she? Is she live? What's happened? And so I'm chained to my phone. And the other problem is that everything is on my phone. My Sainsbury's shopping, my Amazon, everything that I'm doing. Often I'm buying, school uniform, socks for the kids or whatever. So I want to try and, as much as possible, kind of, be able to take a step back. And it might mean that things are less convenient and people can't get in touch with me. And that has to be okay. Because if I don't do that, then I will not ever be able to be present with my kids. I think we all need to be a lot stricter. We all love validation. That's why these platforms have got us. We're all spending too much time on even LinkedIn. LinkedIn is social media. You do a post and you find yourself, how many people have liked my post? And you get that little good feeling, and then you want more of it. And so I think, I completely understand that your generation is looking at the adults in the room and going, hang on a second, you can't tell us what to do, but you're doing it just as badly. So again, I'm not saying adults should have no smartphones. They are really, really useful when you've got a developed brain and you're kind of ready to withstand that. That's fine. But as far as possible, get a distance away from it. Anna Lemke, if you know who she is, she's an amazing dopamine expert. She says do dopamine fasting, which is just put your phone away for hours, because that's how you start to rewire your brain and your brain gets out of that checking cycle. But we all need to do a lot more on this. If I could, I wouldn't have a smartphone. I hate it, but I know that I kind of, at the moment, probably do need it. But yeah, it's something we need to be really, really honest about.
Thank you. No, I completely resonate with that, especially when you get off social media for about a day and suddenly it's like you've just fallen off the face of the earth. And it's one of those things that's like, we shouldn't be as connected to each other as much as we do. It's probably 20, 30 years back. We didn't have things as developed as smartphones at the time. And it just goes to show that with human nature, we shouldn't have to be sort of surveillanced by each other 24/7. I think that's something that's really prevalent at the moment, and people should be just starting to address that more.
And just on that quickly, I want to come back, that we need to be really aware of the fact this is all coming from the tech companies. These platforms are maximizing engagement, so they are making us feel that we need to be connected and it's benefiting us, and we will miss out if we're not. But it's just simply not true. It's just about making money for the business model and for their shareholders. Children do not need hundreds of shallow connections. They need a few friends in real life that they can hang out with. And that's what childhood is. It's interactions in real life. It's the same as adults. We don't need hundreds and hundreds of connections. I don't know about you, but whenever I go on social media, I feel worse. I don't feel more connected. I feel more stressed. And so we need to look at how this is impacting us, remembering that we are all being manipulated here, I'm afraid to say. Yes, there are some benefits, but most of them are not, they're not at what they're made out to be. Sorry, I interrupted you. Feel very
No
passionate
worries.
about
No, I was just going to springboard that and say that we kind of only need one or two apps in the first place that would actually manage everything. But it's sort of the merging of several different apps with several different features. Now you go on Snapchat and there's a reel feature the same way that Instagram has one, but then Instagram also has like ChatGPT or like AI bots on it now. So it all kind of merges together and makes you still think that there's like a necessity between them. And I just think that with kids, if you involve kids with this and it becomes a really alarming false sense of comfort and closeness with other people. So yeah, I think,
Absolutely.
no, that's all I had to say. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Eden.
Thanks, Mariam. So my question is, you've kind of touched on this quite a lot already, but what do you think will be the biggest long-term impacts on children and young people who are accessing screens and phones and social media from such an early age?
Wow, that's a big question. I think just the wiring of the brain for dopamine is just massive. We speak to some teachers who say that by the time the child has turned up at school, they've already been on a screen for an hour and a half. They are already in that quick dopamine loop. And we know that with quick dopamine, it floods your brain, and then the rebalance means that you feel lethargic and quite low, and you can feel a bit depressed. And the hard stuff is just not fun, like reading a book. The stuff that takes a little bit of persistence and determination is just too hard to do. So that's why teachers then are resorting to screens, because they're like, these children are wired, they're addicted already when they turn up at school. I have to do something, so I've got to match like with like. I've got to get them on screens again if they're going to learn something. So I think that feeling that you need that constant validation, that constant dopamine, is going to be a big impact. We know that children are reading less. Concentration, focus, our big thing, generation focus. We are all about giving this generation a chance to pay attention. We know, and this happens for adults too, but if you're checking your phone the whole time, your brain gets used to interrupting itself, so that even if there isn't an interruption, every 2 or 3 minutes, your brain is looking around for where's that hit. So unable to focus for more than a few minutes, that means unable to get into deep thought, unable to properly learn, is an impact. That constant connection thing that we've talked about, that feeling that is being put on this generation that they need to be in constant contact, that's actually coming from parents, tech companies, lots of things. They don't need it, but it's the norm. So then just not being in contact feels terrifying. The need for everything to be quick. So if I think about, like, my children often come home from school and they say, "Mummy, did you get an email about something?" They really want to know straight away. And I always try and say, "I might have. I don't know. I'm going to check, and I'm going to check later," just to make people wait, because we are all in this world now where life is friction free. Everything is easy. Uber Eats, Deliveroo. Oh, I want a coffee. Bring it to me. I don't have to wait for anything. Amazon. Gosh, it took me more than 40 seconds to buy something on Amazon. That is just unacceptable. So I think the inability to wait, but this isn't just kids, this is us as well. I think it affects all of us the same. And just that when we see the whole world laid out in front of us in these beautiful, technicolor, it can feel like real life is not as exciting. And actually, I think we need to just stop that and remember that the world is an incredible place. But if we look at these manufactured worlds online the whole time, and if we're kind of sold this idea that you can be a YouTube influencer and you're going to make millions just by sitting in your bedroom making videos, then actually normal jobs and the real world is going to suddenly feel a little bit less exciting. So I think there's a huge range of impacts. But important to say, there are also good impacts. I think the younger generation are more tolerant, more inclusive, very incredibly wise. I think sometimes feel like they have the world on their shoulders, which is not how it should be, but really thinking about the world and how they can change it and make it better. I think is an amazing thing as well, and probably some of that has come from the internet and social media. So don't want to say that everything is bad, but I think there are some things. The fundamental way that children are learning to think and interact is being interrupted by these devices, and I think that's an urgent situation that we need to address.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it was really interesting that you ended with the good things as well, because I think sometimes we can kind of, like, obviously there is so many negatives and kind of things that are, obviously it's impacting us and it's altering our brains, and younger kids are so reliant on everything, but I think they can really learn a lot as well. And kind of, I think also like activists and like influencers like who want to make a difference can really have that platform as well. So it's good in that respect. I'm going to pass to Patty for the next section.
So one of the other things that we've seen in schools is a lot of distraction, and you're all about generation focus. and kind of focus. And one of the things that I experience in schools is photos being taken in lessons of each other and in break times and shared on group chats. Do you think that's something that's becoming more prevalent?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is one of the key problems and one of the key reasons that children shouldn't be able to bring phones with cameras to school. We know it's causing a massive problem. You know, when I was at school, I could turn up, no makeup, not looking anything in particular, not worrying about it because no one was going to be taking photos, no one was going to be filming me. We know now, and we've spoken to teenagers who say they have to turn up camera ready, full makeup, because, in case someone takes a photo of them and puts it up on social media, that is just getting them to constantly be thinking about how they are coming across rather than just focusing on learning. We know that if we spend too much time trying to kind of control how people are perceiving us, that's not a route to happiness. It's a route to anxiety and just feeling not great. So I think that's a big issue. And then there's also the issue we hear from teachers that fights escalate a lot more because they're being filmed and then they get put on TikTok, so people don't want to lose face. Teachers are being filmed. Teachers do not feel safe anymore because if they tell someone off, it's being filmed and it's getting put somewhere. This is not that's not a fair environment on teachers. But yeah, and of course then there's the whole safeguarding thing of, inappropriate images being shared. It's a complete minefield. And I think a lot of these issues can be removed if we have phones which don't have cameras. We don't need cameras. You really don't need a camera on your phone. Just a communication device so you can call and text is really all you need in the school setting. So yeah, I think they're having a really, really damaging effect on school life.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that you mentioned as well was like hypersurveillance. And I do remember often in school, it would be anything just mildly interesting happens. Somebody's already got a camera maybe hidden under a table, or they're ready to film it straight up. If there's a fight or something, like someone's like spreading rumors or something, there's always a need to film and to spread it out and sort of try and control the situation through social media in a way. And it kind of reminds me of like the panopticon, where people have like, they feel the need to regulate a lot, even though they might not be recorded, but they think that there is a chance of being recorded. So they constantly try and, like you said, be like camera ready all the time, or always have the wittiest comebacks, or always, even with teachers as well, there's a sort of pressure in the classroom that there's screen on them, which is genuinely very intrusive. And I completely agree with the fact.
Yeah, it's not healthy. It's image management essentially is what we're doing. We are constantly thinking about how are we looking. It's just not, it's the opposite of what we should be doing and what children should be dealing with. And yeah, I think the other thing to think about with all of this is when we look at the tech bros and what they do with their kids, they don't give their children devices. A lot of them, Steve Jobs said that the iPad was too dangerous to have in the house. Bill Gates didn't give his children any devices until they were 14. And if you go to those schools in Silicon Valley, there is no tech. Some of them don't even have a whiteboard. They have blackboards because they know what this technology is doing. And they don't give it to their own kids. So why is it okay for everyone else's kids to have it? I just think, we need to remember that it's not fair.
Yeah. There was something even that you mentioned beforehand where, you don't need these phones in school, and just even having the phone there, it can be kind of like a passive feeling of there's just being like, what's the word, like being monitored all the time. And I get it, you want to be validated, you want to be like sort of already not missing out on anything. And it becomes almost a way to control you. And relating to that as well, some students might feel that there's really strict phone policies that are about control rather than care. But when you talk with young people in schools that are moving towards smartphone-free cultures, what concerns did they raise, and what tends to shift their views over time?
What's really interesting is that whenever we ask teenagers about it, it's just the FOMO thing. They just don't want to be the odd ones out, which is completely understandable. That's just human nature. And that feels unfair. And I get that. But what's interesting is that if you then say to them, well, if no one had a smartphone and no one had social media, well, how do you feel about that? And they say, yeah, no, that would be great. And actually, some groups of teenagers have even said to us, we would pay money for no one to have social media. It's just that everyone else has got it. So I think that's really interesting. I think we need to remember that. And that's why we're in this collective action problem. No one wants this. Parents don't want this. Teachers don't want this. Even young people often don't want it. They just don't want to feel left out. And it's hard to imagine a life without it. And yeah, it feels unfair. Why should the adults being sick, taking this digital thing away from them that we are allowed as adults? I get that. But I think, yeah, it usually does come down to you just want to do what your mates are doing. And the kids that we know who've got brick phones, if lots of their friends have got brick phones, they are happy. They are completely happy. And that's the power of, the smartphone free childhood parent pack, for example, where parents can club together and say, look, let's all do this together. And then it's just taken away. So to me, that is the main worry. It's the FOMO thing. There was one study that said that 46% of young people would prefer a world without the internet, which I just find an absolutely unbelievable stat, given the fact that kids have grown up with the internet. Nearly half are saying they'd all send it all back. And of course, that's because social media has become a cesspit. It's just horrid. It's not helping them. And so it just shows that we need to change things really quickly. We need to have an internet that feels like it's helping children and helping them learn and benefiting them, rather than commoditizing their attention and basically just taking their time. Childhood is time. And if time is taken away and you are spending 30 hours or more on a smartphone, that's just, it's kind of just wasting your time. So yeah, I think it's the FOMO thing really that is usually the main pushback. But actually, I'm interested, what do you think? When you hear parents talking about bans and stuff in schools, what are your main concerns about that?
There's two parts of it, I think. One being that it's really good for, attention and learning. It's sort of how schools were meant to be. Like, traditionally speaking, we've got these systems that are built upon like active learning and talking to classmates and socializing in the classroom, rather than feeling like you've missed out on something just because, you've gone home one day and you're not on Snapchat on that particular night, and then you come back and suddenly this person isn't a friend with that person, or something happened at this time. And I think it could be like, if we stop this, if we completely ban this, we have to change something about how the current direction of learning is going, because a lot of the things are becoming sort of online. Everything is being transitioned online. Homework is being done online. So I have a younger sister, and one of the things that she does is maths or homework assignments, I think, on Seneca Learning. And my mother gets an email for when they set assignments now. So a little bit about, having this overlap between like homework and assignments online as well. But what I do know is that she gets a lot of her assignments online, which is not bad. But the way that I see it is that, to actually write it down kind of exercises a part of your brain that actually helps you retain that knowledge. So in a way, it's working out, but it is just to have that collective action is really hard, because you're sort of telling this to like children that are like trying to conform, and everyone's on social media, everyone's on their phones, like you've said. So the first step is usually hardest, but it's kind of what we need to go towards. I don't think a complete blanket ban is what we need, but definitely trying to steer that motivation and that learning so that it doesn't become a passive thing. So it's a bit like you said, where there's not a lot of things are like very friction free, and detox is not really easy. So we've got, Deliveroo and apps like that, like what you've said before, but then detoxing itself is not that easy to access. And I think the moment that we start doing that, we can actually finally start directing kids, not exactly to have a ban on phones, but to start minimizing the phones when it comes to active learning in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you've hit on so many important points there. And in terms of learning is not meant to be friction free. Learning is hard. That's the point. Your brain grows when you are doing stuff that is hard. And that is in direct contravention from how these apps work. These apps are easy. They're just like easy rewards, quick. And it's really taking away from our ability to really keep trying and learning. And, I just think it's a massive problem that we haven't got a handle on. And, as we talked about EdTech, it's being rapidly embedded in schools. And I think we need to think really carefully about it. And then, there's also the safeguarding as well. So there's the learning and attention, and it's a nightmare for that. But also, it's very hard for schools to have filters that are properly stopping all of this, really awful stuff that we know is happening. Most children, when they first see pornography, it's on their school device doing their homework. And often that content finds them. They haven't searched it out. I went to a talk this week and someone told a story about a 7-year-old who was shown porn on his school device. He has been addicted to pornography ever since. And so the safeguarding angle is just something, again, we are not really thinking about enough. The only thing between a 7-year-old and this content is the school filter. And one stat I heard was that around 50% of school filters do not work. So it's the learning, and it's also the really, really awful content that cannot be unseen. Flossie told us of a person that she knows who was having nightmares for a long, long time because of content that was seen. It's very hard to unsee these things. And with a developing brain, whether it's learning or dealing with these images, it's really, really damaging.
Yeah, you just reminded me of how they did have those school filters everywhere. They installed them on every single computer in school, and yet kids somehow found a way. Like, there was this thing about what I remember in my school was that people would use VPNs to try and negate the school filters. So yeah, exactly like you said, the filter doesn't actually work, but it almost serves as a motivation to try and rebel against it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, like, what can we do beyond that, if I can get your insight on that kind of thing?
Well, on the how to get the getting around things.
Yeah, so with those systems, it's not just regulating, because obviously there's a lot of disturbing media online, and there's only so much you can do when it comes to being outside of school. But within schools, what can we do to get past that system, or try and better that system for teachers or future teaching as well?
Well, I think teachers need to be armed with more knowledge and understanding of these systems, because I think they've been put in a really difficult situation. And often they don't have the knowledge to really make these things safe. And also there's a real grey area around children's data. And when parents sign consent for children to use these apps, where is that information going? Often it's going to third parties, and we don't know what those third parties are doing with that data. And the experts in this area say that there is a real grey area here, and actually often schools don't fully understand what's happening with that data. And they have pressure put on them to adopt these systems, which make things easier. So I think knowledge and understanding and education for schools who, frankly, have got a busy time. They're trying to run a school. They don't have time to also get a PhD in computer science and data and all of this sort of stuff. So it needs to be made easier, and the companies need to make it easier, and so that things are safe. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of school devices, something really awful being seen by a child. It's happening the whole time. So I think definitely knowledge and education, but I do also think that's why, where we are at the moment, the reason that we have adopted the position of saying let's get phones out of schools, for example, is because we know that social media is not going to be cleaned up anytime soon. It's still really bad. The Online Safety Act has done something, but it has not cleaned it up anywhere near enough. And I would say this is why kind of having less time on screens is better. And it's the same for EdTech as well. It's the only way you can make sure that children are not looking at stuff. They're not on these screens as much of the time and not doing so much homework on them. And also from a parent perspective, making sure that screens are not in the bedroom, and devices, even if it's doing your homework, not doing it in the bedroom. Because the problem is these companies don't really have an incentive to make them easy, to make them safe. They could do it, of course. It could be much simpler. But, we have so many parents talking about the fact that they just simply don't know how to make the school iPad properly safe. They don't know how to properly lock it down. It's not intuitive. So ethically, of course, the companies need to make it much easier, and schools need to understand this stuff more.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to flip the script and ask you advice about Flipp Gen and how we as Gen Z digital rebels can support Gen Alpha. So my first point's on education. If you were a rebel like us, what key pieces of information about smartphones would you say to the Gen Alpha and be educating them about?
Okay. Oh, it's really hard because I'm from such a different kind of generation. I think it's really important for young children to understand the business model as soon as possible. To explain the algorithm. Remember that this is about making money for companies. This is about taking your time, your life, your childhood to make money for other people. So is that what you want? Is the first thing. To be really conscious of that, and to notice what's happening. When you go on social media, do you feel better or do you feel worse? Okay, that is your brain telling you something. And maybe to understand that actually FOMO feels like the strongest motivator in all of this. But to remember, there's also FOMO when you're all on these apps as well. In fact, there's probably worse FOMO because are you in this group? Did you go to that party? Et cetera, et cetera. Children are always going to experience FOMO. It's not necessarily going to be made better by being on a phone. What else would I say? From an older perspective, that childhood is short. Childhood doesn't go on for very long. It feels like it goes on for ages, and then suddenly you're an adult. It's a time to just have fun and not have the burden of feeling like you have to be something, have to look like something, have to please people. And this is all coming from adults who are trying to make money out of you. Just to kind of be bold, be brave, and say, you know what, I don't want this. But also to remember that this is not their fault. They have come into this situation that has been created by adults, and now somehow it's that often they can feel like they're to blame. They are not to blame. This is something that the adults in the room need to be sorting out. This is not their fault. But just to kind of remember their power as well. Like, they're an amazing generation living in an unbelievably fast changing world. The development of AI and all of this stuff happening so quickly. I think we're going to look back and think, my goodness, that was an incredible time. And to remember the positives of life. Things can feel really overwhelming, but actually there's an amazing stuff going on as well, and to remember that, and to be kind to themselves as well. I think social media can make you really not kind to yourself because you think you're not good enough, you're not thin enough, you're not that, whatever it is. Just remember they are enough, they are good enough. And if they're made to feel less so than apps, just don't go on the apps. Just kind of remember they're great and they're doing brilliantly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think obviously there's like such a pressure and such an expectation, and I think really remembering that you're navigating this for the first time, and there's so much that comes with that, and it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. I think just like you said, being kind to yourself is so important. I'm going to pass to Mariam for the regulation question now.
Yeah, thank you. I think you sort of covered it, but if you were a Gen Z digital rebel, what's one change to the digital regulation that you would be campaigning for, and why? So this could be about age verification or addictive features, data collection.
Oh gosh, there's so much. I think, the persuasive design should be changed straight away, because they could change the algorithm straight away. They could make it so that technology was a force for good and it made you feel better. That would be possible. I think that would be great. I think raising the data consent from 13 to 16 so that companies cannot harvest the data of 13-year-olds, which, 16 is the legal age in lots of other countries. I think because that would change a lot. It would mean that children aren't the product anymore, that you cannot use their data to sell them more stuff and to capture their attention more. So if that was taken away, that would be very, very powerful and probably solve a lot of problems, and also ethically it is the correct thing to do. So I think that would be probably the biggest thing. But just broadly, just not seeing children as something to be commoditized. It is fundamentally and ethically wrong. So I think that's what needs to be changed.
Children end up being sort of this naive open source for data collection and selling data as well. So it's a constant, very vicious cycle of recycling and using the same techniques. And it's like Eden said, it's like they keep getting away with it, and they keep like almost advancing every time that they do, and it only gets harder to stop. But I think Eden probably has something to say about this.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's just that constant pressure, and everything's going so quickly, and it's so hard to kind of keep up. And even as adults as well, like we were saying, it's so hard to kind of keep track of everything and all the changes in the development of AI as well. Obviously such a big one as well. So my last question is on collaboration. So it's been so good to have you. We're just kind of wondering, what could another potential collaboration with yourself, Generation Focus, what could that look like?
So we say on a daily basis that the voice of young people is often missing from this conversation. And, you guys are doing an amazing job in filling that. But we need to hear more. We need to hear from more young people, because this is broadly adults arguing about this problem. And what's really interesting is every time you speak to the children, I think I'm always blown away by they get this problem so much more. So I think that, young people, you guys, we need to hear more from you about what your experience was. We need those stories. If we look at what happened with Flossie when she told her story a couple of weeks ago, it was unbelievable, the amount of engagement and impact that had, because And what we realized was that actually kids aren't talking to each other that much about this stuff. Often it's something you're kind of dealing with alone. So, the more we can have kind of, the younger people putting their voices out, like you guys, I think the better. And I think also because we work a lot with head teachers in schools, they also need to hear from you, to hear, what did you experience at school, for example, and what was the impact? And so I think there's a real value in that collaboration.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think adults facilitating those conversations and allowing young people to have them is so important. I'm going to pass to Mariam to close us off.
Thank you, Eden. Yeah, since we are nearing the end of the podcast, there's been so much very rich conversation and things to take away from this. One of the things we mentioned was algorithms, business models, like you said, and understanding your value as time having value as a young person, and how it's really easy to get caught up in FOMO, and how social media ensnares you in having to be in reels and having to always catch up on certain things, certain trends and cultures, but when instead we should be more present and have fun with our time as teenagers. Check out FlipGen and generationfocus.com for more information, tools and ideas on how to build a healthier digital world for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Claire, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to everyone listening. This has been Flip the Script with Digital Rebels, and see you next time.